My name is Inez, and I am 58 years old. I have lived in this two-story colonial home in Ohio for over 30 years, raising my two sons here after my husband Roger passed away 8 years ago. Tonight started like any other Sunday evening. I had just finished serving dinner to my family, cleaning up the kitchen with love in my heart and hope for better days ahead. But what happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about my own child and changed the course of our family forever. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from tonight. Please hit that like button if you have ever struggled with difficult family relationships, and do not forget to subscribe because I have so much more to share about finding strength in our darkest moments. I need to tell you about my family so you can understand how we got to that terrible moment on the stairs. After Roger died from a heart attack 8 years ago, I found myself raising two very different sons on my own. Gerald, my older boy, is 26 now. He has always been my steady rock, the responsible one who stepped up when his father passed. He works as an electrician, married his sweetheart Linda 3 years ago, and they live about 20 minutes away in a small apartment while saving for their first house. Gerald visits me every Sunday, without fail, helps fix whatever breaks around this old house, and always makes sure I am doing okay. Then there is Marcus, my younger son. He is 22, and I have to admit, he has been my biggest worry for the past few years. Marcus was always the bright one, the clever child who could talk his way out of any trouble. He started college with such promise, studying business at the state university. But halfway through his junior year, something changed. He dropped out. Suddenly, moved back into his childhood bedroom, and has been unemployed for 8 months now. This house holds so many memories of happier times. Roger and I bought it when Gerald was just 2 years old, back when we dreamed of filling every room with laughter and love. The kitchen still has the same yellow wallpaper Roger hung himself, and the living room carpet shows where patterns from years of the boys playing with their toys. Every corner reminds me of bedtime stories, birthday parties, and family dinners when we were all together and whole. My daily routine has become quite simple since Roger passed. I work part-time at the local library shelving books and helping patrons find what they need. The pay is modest, but it covers the basics and gives me purpose beyond these walls. In the evenings, I come home to cook dinner, hoping Marcus might emerge from his room long enough for us to have a real conversation. Most nights, he stays hidden upstairs, only coming down to grab food from the refrigerator before disappearing again. The tension with Marcus has been building for months now. It started with small things. He would criticize the meals I prepared, complaining that I never bought the brands he preferred. When I gently reminded him that money was tight since I lost Roger's income, he would roll his eyes and mutter about how I should get a better job. The requests for money became more frequent and demanding. $20 here, $50 there, always for some vague opportunity he refused to explain in detail. What hurt most was watching my cheerful, loving boy transform into someone I barely recognized. He would sleep until noon, spend hours on his phone or computer, and speak to me with a tone of voice that made me feel like an inconvenience in my own home. When Gerald would visit and try to talk sense into his younger brother, Marcus would explode with anger, accusing us both of ganging up on him and treating him like a failure. This particular Sunday morning started with such hope in my heart. I had decided to make Marcus's favorite meal, thinking that perhaps a special dinner might bridge the growing distance between us. I woke up early and drove to the grocery store, carefully choosing each item despite my tight budget. The pot roast alone cost more than I usually spend on meat for a week, but I told myself it would be worth it if I could see my son smile again. I spent the entire morning in the kitchen, starting with the pot roast that needed hours to become tender. I peeled potatoes by hand, the way Roger always loved them, and prepared fresh green beans instead of using the frozen ones I usually buy. The smell of homemade bread filled the house as I mixed and kneaded the dough, remembering how both boys used to sneak pieces of raw dough when they thought I was not looking. While the bread was rising, I started on Marcus's favorite dessert apple pie with extra cinnamon. I thought about all the times he had asked me to make it during his high school years, especially when he was stressed about exams or girlfriend troubles. Back then, a slice of warm pie could solve almost any problem in his world. I found myself hoping that maybe, just maybe, it still could. Gerald and Linda arrived right on time at 4 o'clock, just as they had every Sunday for the past 3 years. Linda carried a small bouquet of daisies from their garden, and Gerald immediately rolled up his sleeves to help me carry dishes to the dining room. We have developed this beautiful routine over the years. They arrive early enough to spend time talking before dinner, and Linda always insists on helping, despite my protests that she is a guest in my home. The three of us chatted easily while putting the finishing touches on the meal. Gerald told me about a challenging electrical job he had completed that week, rewiring an old house similar to ours. Linda shared news about her promotion at the bank where she works as a teller. Their faces glowed when they talked about saving money for their future home, and I felt such pride watching my older son build a stable, loving life for himself. When everything was ready, I called upstairs for Marcus to join us. The first call went unanswered, as did the second. Finally, Gerald walked to the bottom of the stairs and called up with more authority in his voice, reminding his brother that dinner was getting cold. We heard movement above the sound of a door opening, and eventually Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs. He came down slowly, wearing wrinkled clothes that he had obviously slept in. His hair was messy, and he had the look of someone who had just woken up, even though it was late afternoon. He took his seat at the table without greeting any of us, immediately reaching for his phone, instead of participating in our conversation. The first few minutes of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. Gerald and Linda tried to include Marcus by asking about his plans for the week, but he responded with single-word answers while staring at his phone screen. I served him generous portions of everything, pointing out that I had made his favorite pot roast specially for him. He looked up just long enough to shrug and mutter something about how he wished I had bought a different cut of meat. As the meal continued, Marcus's mood seemed to darken rather than improve. He complained that the potatoes were too salty, even though he added more salt from the shaker. He criticized the green beans, saying they were overcooked despite eating every single one on his plate. When Linda complimented the homemade bread, Marcus made a sarcastic comment about how store-bought would have saved everyone time and effort. Gerald's jaw tightened with each of his brother's rude remarks, but he held his tongue out of respect for me. I could see Linda growing increasingly uncomfortable as she witnessed this side of Marcus for the first time. She had heard about his behavior from Gerald, but experiencing it firsthand was clearly shocking to someone who had never seen a family member speak so disrespectfully to their mother. The breaking point came when Marcus suddenly looked up from his plate and announced that he needed $500 by tomorrow morning. He said it casually, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. When I gently asked what the money was for, he became immediately defensive, saying it was for an investment opportunity and I would not understand the details anyway. I explained as calmly as I could that I did not have $500 to spare. My part-time salary barely covers the mortgage, utilities, and groceries, especially with him living here without contributing anything to household expenses. I suggested that maybe he could look for a job to earn the money he needed, or at least explain the opportunity so I could better understand what he was asking for. Marcus exploded at my response, his voice rising as he accused me of being unsupportive and holding him back from success. He said I clearly favored Gerald, pointing to the fact that I had helped pay for Gerald's trade school years ago. I tried to explain that Gerald had worked part-time throughout his education and paid back every penny I lent him, but Marcus was not interested in hearing logic. He brought up grievances from years past, complaining about everything from his childhood bedtime to the brand of sneakers I bought him in middle school. Gerald finally spoke up firmly, telling his brother to stop speaking to me that way and show some respect in my own home. This only made Marcus angrier, and he accused both of us of conspiring against him and treating him like he was worthless. The beautiful dinner I had prepared with such love was ending in chaos and hurt feelings. Linda sat quietly, clearly wishing she could disappear, while Gerald struggled to control his own anger at his brother's behavior. I felt tears threatening to spill over as I watched my family fall apart over my dining room table. Marcus finally threw his napkin down, pushed back his chair with enough force to scrape the hardwood floor, and stormed out of the room without another word. We heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs and the slam of his bedroom door above us. After Marcus left the table, the three of us sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The beautiful meal I had prepared with such care felt ruined by the tension that now filled the room like a dark cloud. Gerald was the first to speak, apologizing to Linda for exposing her to his brother's behavior, and to me for not intervening sooner. I assured him that none of this was his fault, while beginning to clear the dishes with shaking hands. Both Gerald and Linda insisted on helping with cleanup despite my protests. As we worked together in the kitchen, washing dishes and storing leftovers, Gerald finally voiced the concerns he had been holding back for months. He told me that Marcus's behavior was getting worse, not better, and that something needed to change before the situation escalated further. Linda, who had been quiet throughout most of the evening, finally spoke up with the gentle honesty that I have come to appreciate about her. She said that watching Marcus speak to me that way had been difficult for her, and she was worried about my well-being. She pointed out that I seemed to be walking on eggshells in my own home, always trying to avoid triggering another outburst from my younger son. Gerald suggested that maybe it was time for Marcus to move out and find his own way in the world. He offered to help his brother get started, even contributing money toward a security deposit for an apartment if Marcus would commit to finding a job. But he was clear that watching Marcus treat me with such disrespect was becoming unbearable for him. I found myself defending Marcus as I had done so many times before. I explained that he was still grieving his father's death in his own way, that young men sometimes take longer to find their direction in life. I reminded Gerald that Marcus was still my baby, and the thought of giving up on him felt like betraying everything I believed about being a mother. Gerald listened patiently to my explanations, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. He pointed out that Marcus had been given every advantage, every opportunity to change his behavior, and instead of improving things, were only getting worse. He worried that my kindness was being taken advantage of, and that Marcus was learning he could treat me badly without any real consequences. The conversation continued as we finished cleaning the kitchen with Linda offering her perspective as someone outside our immediate family. She gently suggested that sometimes loving someone means setting boundaries even when it feels cruel. She shared a story about her own brother who had struggled with similar issues until their parents finally insisted he stand on his own 2 feet. When Gerald and Linda were ready to leave, we stood together in the front hallway for several more minutes of quiet conversation. Gerald made me promise to call him if Marcus caused any more problems, and he gave me an extra key to his apartment in case I ever needed somewhere safe to stay. The fact that my own son felt I might need refuge from my other son broke my heart in ways I could not yet fully process. After they drove away, I stood in my empty kitchen, feeling more alone than I had since the day Roger died. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made me nervous about what might happen next. I could hear Marcus moving around upstairs, the sound of his television playing louder than usual, as if he were trying to block out the world below. I spent the next hour finishing small tasks around the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean and organizing cupboards that did not need organizing. I was avoiding the inevitable conversation I knew I needed to have with Marcus, but I also knew I could not go to bed with things left the way they were. Finally, I cut a generous slice of the apple pie I had made specially for him and prepared a cup of coffee, the way he liked it, with extra cream and sugar. Maybe a peace offering would help us find our way back to each other. Maybe if I approached him gently without any mention of the dinner incident, we could start fresh and rebuild our relationship. I climbed the stairs slowly, balancing the plate and coffee cup carefully. The stairway in our old house is narrow, with 14 wooden steps leading to the second floor where both boys' bedrooms were located. The banister is original to the house dark wood that Roger had refinished himself when we first moved in. When I reached Marcus's door, I stood outside for a moment, listening to the sounds from within. His television was still playing, and I could hear him talking to someone on the phone. His voice animated in a way it never was when speaking to me anymore. I knocked gently on the door and called his name softly, not wanting to startle him or interrupt his call if it was important. The talking stopped immediately, and I heard movement inside the room. I called out again, explaining that I had brought him some pie and coffee, hoping we could talk for a few minutes before bedtime. I told him through the closed door that I loved him and wanted to work things out between us, that family was too important to let pride and misunderstandings tear us apart. The door suddenly opened, and Marcus appeared in the doorway with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes were cold and angry in a way that made me take an instinctive step backward. He was no longer the frustrated young man from dinner, but someone who seemed genuinely dangerous in his rage. He immediately launched into a verbal assault that was far worse than anything he had said at the dinner table. He called my peace offering pathetic and accused me of trying to manipulate him with food and fake kindness. He said I was a terrible mother who had never understood him and that his father's death was probably a blessing because Roger would have been ashamed of what I had become. I stood on the narrow landing at the top of the stairs, still holding the plate and coffee cup, trying to process the venom in his words. This was not the son I had raised, not the boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, not the teenager who once wrote me a Mother's Day card saying I was his hero. Marcus stepped closer to me, backing me toward the top of the staircase as he continued his tirade. He demanded the $500 again, saying he would leave forever if I did not give it to him by morning. He said he was tired of living in this house with someone who obviously did not care about his future or his dreams. I tried to remain calm, speaking in the gentle voice I had used when he was a child having a tantrum. I explained again that I simply did not have that much money available, and I asked him to please step back and give me some space on the narrow landing. But my words only seemed to fuel his anger further. The look in his eyes changed to something that truly frightened me. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own child. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, and in that moment, he seemed capable of anything. I realized with growing terror that I was trapped at the top of the stairs with nowhere to go. What happened next occurred so quickly that my mind struggled to process it in real time. Marcus raised both hands and shoved me hard in the chest, sending me tumbling backward into empty space. The plate of pie and coffee cup flew from my hands as I desperately tried to grab the banister, but my fingers found only air. Time seemed to move in slow motion as I fell down those 14 wooden steps. I remember the sound of the ceramic plate shattering against the wall, the splash of hot coffee against the stairway paint, and the repeated impact of my body against each hard step. My left shoulder hit the banister with tremendous force, and I felt something give way with a sickening snap. When I finally came to rest at the bottom of the stairs, I lay motionless on the cold hardwood floor of our front hallway. Every part of my body screamed in pain, but the sharpest agony came from my left shoulder and the back of my head where it had struck the floor. I could feel something warm and wet in my hair, and I realized with growing alarm that I was bleeding. For several moments, neither Marcus nor I moved or spoke. I lay crumpled on the floor, trying to assess the extent of my injuries while fighting against panic and shock. My left arm felt completely wrong, hanging at an angle that made me sick to look at. When I tried to push myself up with my right hand, waves of dizziness washed over me so strongly that I had to close my eyes and focus on just breathing. Marcus finally appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at me with an expression of shock and dawning horror. I could see him processing what he had done, his face cycling through disbelief, fear, and desperate attempts to justify his actions. He started down the stairs slowly, as if he were afraid of what he might find when he reached me. When he got halfway down, he stopped and began stammering apologies mixed with defensive explanations. He said he had not meant to push me so hard, that he was just trying to make a point that I should not have been standing so close to the stairs. His words came out in a rushed, panicked stream that made no logical sense. I tried to speak to tell him that I needed help and that something was seriously wrong with my shoulder, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The pain in my head was making it difficult to think clearly, and I began to worry that I might have a concussion along with whatever damage had been done to my shoulder. Marcus came closer, close enough to see the blood in my hair and the unnatural position of my left arm. The sight seemed to panic him even more, and instead of helping me or calling for medical assistance, he began backing away. He kept repeating that this was not his fault, that I had been the one standing too close to the stairs, that accidents happen in old houses like ours. I managed to whisper his name and ask him to help me sit up, but he continued backing away from me as if I were something dangerous, rather than his injured mother lying helpless on the floor. The look of panic in his eyes was so intense that I began to fear he might flee, rather than take responsibility for what had happened. Finally, Marcus turned and ran back up the stairs, leaving me alone at the bottom with my injuries and my terror. I heard his bedroom door slam shut, and then silence fell over the house like a heavy blanket. I was trapped on the cold floor, unable to move, without excruciating pain, with no way to call for help. I tried to remember where I had left my cell phone, but realized with growing despair that it had been in my back pocket and must have fallen out during the tumble down the stairs. I could not see it anywhere within my limited range of vision, and I certainly could not move around to search for it. The next 20 minutes felt like hours as I lay motionless on the hardwood floor, listening for any sound from upstairs that might indicate Marcus was coming to help me. Instead, I heard only the muffled sound of his television and occasionally his voice as he apparently made phone calls to friends telling them some version of events that probably painted him as the victim of an unreasonable mother. The physical pain was overwhelming, but the emotional devastation was even worse. My own son, the child I had carried in my body and raised with unconditional love, had deliberately hurt me and then abandoned me in my moment of greatest need. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical injury ever could. As I lay there in the growing darkness of evening, I began to understand that my relationship with Marcus was forever changed. There would be no going back to the way things were, no pretending that this had been an accident or a momentary loss of control. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I would have to find a way to live with that reality. I closed my eyes and tried to conserve my strength while praying that someone would come to help me. I thought about Gerald and Linda safe in their own home, having no idea that their Sunday evening visit had ended in violence and abandonment. I wondered how long I would have to lie here before someone discovered me, and whether my injuries were serious enough to be life-threatening. The sound of a key turning in the front door lock was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I called out weakly, hoping whoever was entering would hear me and come to my aid. When Gerald's familiar voice called back to me, I began crying with relief so intense that my whole body shook. Gerald had returned to retrieve his work jacket, which he had forgotten during the emotional aftermath of dinner. He later told me that something had been nagging at him all evening, an uneasy feeling that had finally compelled him to drive back and check on me. As he opened the front door, he immediately noticed the broken ceramic pieces and coffee stains on the stairway wall. Following the trail of destruction, his eyes found me lying crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. In one swift moment, my responsible older son transformed into a man of action. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands gentle but efficient, as he assessed my condition while simultaneously pulling out his cell phone to call for emergency medical assistance. Gerald's voice was calm and clear as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, providing our address and a detailed description of my visible injuries. He told them he suspected a broken collarbone and possible head trauma, and that an ambulance was needed immediately. His competence and composure in the crisis made me realize just how much he had matured since his father's death. While we waited for the paramedics, Gerald carefully positioned himself to support my head and neck without moving me unnecessarily. He spoke to me in soothing tones, telling me that help was on the way and that everything would be okay. When I tried to explain what had happened, he listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail I managed to whisper. When I finished my halting explanation of Marcus's assault, Gerald sat quietly for a moment, processing the information. Then he looked up toward the second floor and called his brother's name with an authority and anger I had never heard from him before. His voice echoed through the house like thunder, demanding that Marcus come downstairs immediately to face what he had done. We heard movement upstairs, the sound of a door opening reluctantly, and finally, Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs, where he had stood 20 minutes earlier, while I lay bleeding at the bottom. Gerald's eyes never left his brother's face as Marcus slowly descended each step, seeming to require tremendous effort. When Marcus reached the bottom of the stairs, he immediately began the same stream of defensive explanations and excuses he had offered earlier. Gerald listened silently until his brother finished speaking, then responded with a controlled fury that was far more intimidating than any shouting could have been. Gerald told Marcus that there was no explanation or justification for what he had done, that pushing our mother down the stairs was assault and could have killed her. He said that Marcus had exactly 1 hour to pack his belongings and leave our family home permanently, and that if he was not gone by the time we returned from the hospital, Gerald would call the police and press charges himself. Marcus tried to argue to minimize the severity of what had happened, to blame me for standing too close to the stairs during our argument. Gerald shut down every attempt at manipulation with cold, hard facts. He pointed out the evidence of violence throughout the stairway, the severity of my injuries, and the fact that Marcus had fled upstairs instead of calling for help. The arrival of the paramedics interrupted their confrontation, but Gerald's message had been delivered clearly. As the medical professionals took over my care, checking my vital signs and preparing me for transport to the hospital, Gerald spoke quietly to the lead paramedic about the circumstances of my fall. I watched from my position on the stretcher as Gerald organized everything with remarkable efficiency. He called Linda to meet us at the hospital, gathered my insurance cards and identification from my purse, and made sure the house was secured before leaving with the ambulance. His strength and competence in handling the crisis showed me a side of my older son that I had never fully appreciated before. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of Marcus standing in our front doorway, looking lost and confused. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct to comfort him and tell him everything would be okay. But then I remembered the cold look in his eyes as he pushed me, and I turned away without acknowledgement. The emergency room experience passed in a blur of medical examinations, x-rays, and consultations with various specialists. Gerald stayed beside me throughout the entire process, holding my good hand and advocating for my care with the medical staff. Linda arrived within an hour, bringing comfort items from home and her own steady presence during a frightening time. The medical team confirmed what we had suspected. I had suffered a fractured collarbone, a mild concussion, and extensive bruising throughout my body. The doctor explained that collarbone fractures were particularly painful and would require several weeks to heal properly. The concussion meant I would need to be monitored closely for the next few days to watch for any complications. As the medical staff worked on treating my injuries, Gerald had quiet conversations with the hospital social worker about the circumstances that led to my fall. He was careful to provide accurate information without embellishing, but he made it clear that this had been an intentional assault rather than an accident. The social worker gently approached the subject of pressing charges against Marcus, explaining that domestic violence cases involving adult children were unfortunately becoming more common. She provided information about restraining orders and victim advocacy services, leaving the materials with Gerald, since I was still too medicated to make clear decisions about legal action. During the drive home from the hospital, with my arms secured in a sling and my head still pounding from the concussion, Gerald and Linda discussed practical arrangements for my immediate care. Linda had already taken time off work to stay with me for the rest of the week, and Gerald had arranged for neighbors to check on me regularly. When we arrived at the house, I was relieved to see that Marcus's car was no longer in the driveway. Gerald used his key to enter first, checking to make sure his brother had actually left as instructed. He found Marcus's room empty, except for furniture, with no note or message left behind to explain where he had gone or when he might return. Gerald spent the next hour implementing security measures that had never been necessary in our home before. He changed the locks on all exterior doors, installed additional deadbolts on the front and back doors, and programmed emergency numbers into every phone in the house. The fact that these precautions were needed because of my own son felt surreal and heartbreaking. That first night was the most difficult as the pain medication wore off and the full reality of what had happened began to sink in. Linda slept in the guest room next to mine, checking on me every few hours as instructed by the hospital discharge nurse. Gerald stayed until nearly midnight, making sure we had everything we needed and that the house felt secure. As I lay in my own bed, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my bedroom, but feeling like everything had changed forever, I began to process the complex emotions surrounding Marcus's departure. Part of me worried about where he would sleep that night and whether he was safe. But a larger part of me felt relief for the first time in months, knowing that I could rest without fear of another confrontation. The following days brought a steady stream of neighbors and friends who had heard about my fall and wanted to offer assistance. Gerald had been careful about how much detail he shared, but word travels quickly in small communities, and people seemed to understand that this had been more than a simple accident. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought homemade soup and offered to drive me to medical appointments. The librarian where I worked sent flowers and assured me that my job would be waiting when I was ready to return. Even people I barely knew from the grocery store and post office stopped by with offers of help during my recovery. Their kindness helped me realize how much support I actually had in my life beyond my immediate family. For years, I had been so focused on trying to fix Marcus's problems that I had neglected other relationships and isolated myself from people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Gerald visited every day after work, bringing groceries and handling household tasks that I could not manage with one arm in a sling. During these visits, we talked more openly than we had in years about family dynamics, Marcus's behavior, and the changes that needed to happen for me to feel safe in my own home. 6 weeks later, as my collarbone healed and the physical evidence of my injuries faded, I found myself living a completely different life than the one I had known before that terrible Sunday evening. The house felt peaceful in a way it had not for months, and I was rediscovering what it meant to feel relaxed and secure in my own home. Gerald had been true to his word about not allowing Marcus to return without major changes. When Marcus called a few days after leaving, trying to negotiate his way back home with promises to behave better, Gerald handled the conversation with firm but fair boundaries. He told his brother that any future relationship with our family would require Marcus to seek professional help and demonstrate real change over time. Linda had become like the daughter I never had, checking on me regularly and including me in their weekend plans and holiday preparations. Through her gentle questions and observations, I began to understand how my relationship with Marcus had become unhealthy long before the night he pushed me down the stairs. She helped me see that my fear of abandoning Marcus had led me to abandon my own needs and well-being. I had been so afraid of being a bad mother that I had enabled bad behavior, teaching Marcus that he could treat me poorly without consequences, and that my love was something he could take for granted. Physical therapy for my shoulder became a metaphor for the emotional healing I needed to do as well. Just as I had to rebuild strength and mobility in my injured arm, I had to rebuild my sense of self-worth and learn to set healthy boundaries with people I loved. The therapist who worked with me was a wise woman named Dorothy, who had raised 4 children of her own. During our sessions, she shared stories about tough love and the difference between helping children and enabling them. She reminded me that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is allow their child to face the consequences of their choices. I began attending a support group for parents of troubled adult children, where I met other mothers and fathers struggling with similar issues. Hearing their stories helped me understand that Marcus's problems were not a reflection of my failure as a mother, and that I had done nothing to deserve the treatment he had given me. 3 months after the incident, I made the difficult decision to put Marcus's belongings in storage and convert his bedroom into a home office where I could pursue freelance writing projects. The symbolic act of reclaiming that space for my own use felt like taking back control of my life and my home. Gerald supported this decision completely, even helping me paint the walls and arrange furniture to create a bright, productive workspace. As we worked together, transforming Marcus's former room, I felt proud of the strong, caring man my older son had become, despite the challenges our family had faced. The writing projects gave me a new sense of purpose and additional income that helped with the medical bills from my emergency room visit. More importantly, they reminded me that I had skills and talents beyond being someone's mother, and that my life had value independent of my relationship with my children. I learned to enjoy simple pleasures that I had forgotten during the stressful months of living with Marcus's unpredictable moods. Reading books without interruption, cooking meals I actually wanted to eat, and falling asleep without worrying about what tomorrow might bring became precious gifts I no longer took for granted. When Marcus called on my birthday 6 months after leaving, I was able to have a brief, cordial conversation with him without feeling guilty or responsible for fixing his problems. He was living with friends and working part-time at a restaurant, but he had not sought the professional help Gerald had recommended as a condition for rebuilding our relationship. I told him I loved him and hoped he was taking care of himself, but I also made it clear that our relationship could not return to the way it had been before. I had learned too much about my own worth and the importance of mutual respect to go back to accepting unacceptable behavior from anyone, even my own son. As I sit here today, 1 year later, I am a fundamentally different person than the woman who climbed those stairs with a peace offering of pie and coffee on that fateful Sunday night. The physical scars have healed completely, but the emotional growth I have experienced has been permanent and transformational. I have learned that love without boundaries is not actually love at all, but a form of fear that ultimately harms everyone involved. My desperate need to be needed by Marcus had prevented him from developing independence and self-respect, while simultaneously destroying my own sense of self-worth. The most profound lesson has been understanding that I cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. For years, I exhausted myself trying to fix Marcus's problems, make excuses for his behavior, and shield him from the natural consequences of his choices. All of this so-called help actually prevented him from growing up and taking responsibility for his own life. Gerald's strength and wisdom during our family crisis showed me what healthy love looks like. He protected me when I needed protection, set clear boundaries when they were necessary, and refused to enable destructive behavior, even when it was difficult. His love for both Marcus and me was demonstrated through actions rather than just words. I have also discovered a community of support that extends far beyond my immediate family. The neighbors who brought meals during my recovery, the coworkers who covered my shifts at the library, and the new friends I made in the support group have all enriched my life in ways I never expected. My relationship with Linda has blossomed into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. She has taught me that family is not just about blood relationships, but about people who choose to show up for each other consistently with kindness and reliability. The home that once felt like a battleground has become a sanctuary again. I wake up each morning feeling grateful for the peace and security that now define my daily life. The simple pleasure of drinking my morning coffee without worrying about someone else's mood has become a daily reminder of how far I have come. I still think about Marcus often and hope that someday he will find his way to a healthier, happier life. But I have accepted that his journey is his own responsibility, and that the best thing I can do for both of us is to maintain the boundaries that protect my well-being while leaving the door open for a respectful relationship if he chooses to build one. The greatest gift of this entire painful experience has been learning to value myself enough to demand respectful treatment from everyone in my life. I spent so many years believing that good mothers sacrifice everything for their children that I forgot mothers are human beings deserving of basic dignity and kindness. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a strong woman who survived a terrible betrayal and chose to use that experience for growth rather than bitterness. I see someone who learned the difference between being loving and being a doormat, between helping and enabling, between family loyalty and self-destruction. If someone had told me a year ago that the worst night of my life would ultimately lead to the best version of myself, I would never have believed them. But sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest teachers, showing us strengths we never knew we possessed and wisdom we never thought we could attain. The scars on my heart have healed differently than I expected. Instead of making me bitter or fearful, they have made me more discerning about who deserves access to my love and energy. They have taught me that protecting myself is not selfish, but necessary for my ability to love others in healthy ways. As I share this story with you today, I hope it might help someone else who is struggling with a difficult family relationship or wondering whether they deserve better treatment from people they love. The answer is always, yes, you deserve respect, kindness, and safety in your most important relationships. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. Not because they are evil, but because they know we will tolerate from them what we would never accept from strangers. Breaking that cycle requires tremendous courage, but the freedom that comes from choosing yourself is worth every difficult step of the journey. The woman who climbed those stairs that Sunday night was afraid of being a bad mother if she stopped enabling her son's destructive behavior. The woman I am today understands that the most loving thing I ever did for Marcus was refusing to continue participating in his dysfunction, even though it meant risking our relationship. I cannot control whether Marcus will ever choose to do the work necessary to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. But I can control how I treat myself and what I accept from others moving forward. That knowledge has given me a peace and confidence I never possessed before, even during the happiest times of my earlier life. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where setting boundaries with someone you love felt impossible, but staying the same felt even worse? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please give this video a like if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to hear more about finding strength in life's most challenging moments. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respectful treatment from everyone in their life, including family members. Thank you for listening to my story with such kindness and attention. May you always remember that choosing yourself is not selfish, but necessary for your ability to love others well. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.